Hello and welcome to a British Cartographic Society Teatime Talk. My name is Chris Rebutus. I am the coordinator for the Teatime Talks and today's chair. I want to welcome everyone to the start of our Map Memoirs series. But before I introduce our speakers, I would like to first pass you over to the BCS President, Seppi Casatari, for a few words about the BCS's 60th year.
Thanks, Christopher. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to 2023. I hope you all had a fantastic festive season. And welcome to this, the 60th anniversary year for the BCS. It's a very exciting milestone in the life of the society. And we want to do lots of things to celebrate it. And this start of this Map Memoir series is sort of our first way of reflecting on some of the things that have made the BCS what it is and make sure that we look forward to the future. Yeah. So thank you to everybody that's agreed to do a Map Memoir. We have a lot of people who've agreed to do it. So I'm really looking forward to some very exciting talks going forward. This 60th year is going to be quite a different year. It's packed with lots of things going on. In particular, I just want to make sure that you know about our 60th in-person conference in Cambridge, hosted at the British Antarctic Survey. I hope as many of you as possible will be there. And if you can't, we will also be looking at what we can do to have virtual components, or at least recording it all and putting it on the YouTube channel. We also have a couple of other major activities going on this year. We have the UK National Report being put together, which then goes off to the ICA in Cape Town. Now, some of you may be able to get to Cape Town. That would be fantastic. But that's a big activity to put alongside the conference that's been organised. And in addition to that, we are now in partnership with the government geography profession to produce our GeoViz toolkit, which is an initiative that we put together working with the newly or recently set up GGP to provide guidance, information, pointers, all sorts of resources that could be used across government geography. And for those of you that have spent your life working in government geography, you'll know that it went through a bit of a cycle of getting rid of the specialisms within government, and this is part of the process of bringing specialisms back. And we, the BCS, are very much at the heart of that. So it's going to be a very big year for us, a very important year, lots going on. So what I really want to do is two things. One is to say a really big thank you to all those who get involved and help out. We have a lot of volunteers. There's lots of people doing things, and they put a lot of time and effort in, for nothing, whenever they can. Doesn't matter whether it's 1 hour in a month or whether it's many days in a month, as some people do. Thank you to you all. It's really important that we have you to make sure that society works. And the second part of that then is to really say to anybody who's on this call, if you've got any time, even if it's just to sit on a committee for an hour a month, we would really like more input. We would like more people to contribute their ideas, their thoughts, give us guidance on where we should be going. So this is both, we're looking forward to this, but also a plea for your help so that you get involved. So with that, that's enough for me. I've got my message across. Hopefully some of you will go, yeah, okay, we'll come and help you out. But let me hand back to Christopher, and let's look forward to what I think are going to be 3 fascinating little talks. Thanks, Christopher.
Hello there, and thank you very much, Seppi, for that. That's given a great overview of what we have to look forward for the rest of this year. So today we're going to have 3 speakers. That's Ken Atherton, Oana Candit, and Paul Naylor. And we'll answer any questions after we've heard all the speakers, so we get through all the talks and get the speakers as much time as possible. So to start us off, I'd like to pass over to Ken.
Thank you very much. So this is where we play at sharing screens, I hope. Thank you for inviting me to start this series of memoirs. My problem, having spent 38 years working for the same organization, was where do I start? So many stories. So I decided to go right back to the very beginning. On the 4th of March, 1963, I joined the Hydrographic Department of the Navy, as it was then called. We now know it as the UK Hydrographic Office. And at that time, it was located on the Edgware Road in Cricklewood, northwest London. And I appeared on that day as a very young, basic grade cartographical draftsman. I was appointed to the chart branch responsible for managing the Admiralty chart coverage of the coast of Africa, the Red Sea, and what we used to call the Persian Gulf. It was here where, under the very watchful eye of an experienced senior draftsman, I learned all about projections and datums, how to use the pens and the inks, and all the other drawing instruments that were required to compile an Admiralty chart. And most importantly, I had to perfect all those different fonts in different sizes and all the symbology that was used on the charts. I seem to remember spending week after week just doing lettering until I got it right. Finally, they let me loose on actual chart corrections. And from doing very small notices to mariners, I was then sort of introduced to what they called blocks. And that was like an A5 extract from a chart that the mariner could stick on their actual chart as a correction. And from there, I worked up to large corrections, which were large corrections. And then new editions. I thought I was doing well. But after about 18 months, they gave me my first new chart. And I really knew at that time I'd arrived. Now, in about 1965, the branch I was working on was developing a series of charts, of coastal charts down the east coast of Africa, all on the standard scale of 1 to 300,000. These were designed to replace the ad hoc existing charts that were just dotted around the east coast of Africa, which were based on very old surveys and had been drawn in the style of the 19th century. My new chart was to replace this one, which was the old chart 662. And as you can see from the title, it was surveyed by Commander Wharton in HMS Shearwater and Fawn between 1874 and 1877. At that nice standard scale of 1 to 415,300. A new series was really required. This particular chart measures 62 centimeters by 45 centimeters, or 25 inches by 18 inches in old money. And it was called a half DE, DE standing for double elephant. I never managed to work out why a half DE was a half double elephant. Why didn't they simply call it an elephant? I never got around that one. Anyway, that was the chart we were going to replace. Now, fortunately, this is my compilation drawing. Well, it's part of my compilation drawing. In my own fair hand, I actually rescued this from a skip. A decision had been made in the mid-1990s that it was no longer necessary to keep all the original compilation drawings because they were merely a means to an end. We had the original documents that were used to create the chart and, of course, the final printed chart. So why keep this compilation drawing? And actually, I found this in a skip and I rescued it. And it spent the last 30 years in my loft. It has suffered a little bit, but I think you can see the detail on it. It was drawn by hand using Talens inks. Talens was, well, still is, a Dutch company. And we had to keep these inks stirred. I learned how to use different nibs for different fonts and different line thicknesses. But just to give you a clue, this is just an extract of the old chart. As you can see, it's covered in depths, in fathoms. It's quite complicated. It's a bit cluttered. Lots of names that don't really mean a lot. And this is an enlargement you're looking at, so you can see it's really quite complicated. So this is my compilation of the same part of that chart, and I'd like to think it's clearer to understand. The coloured lines are contours or depth contours, and you've got low water coral, you've got mangrove, you've got sand, which makes it a lot clearer. And when this was printed, the chart actually looked like that, which I think you'll admit is a much better rendition for the area and much clearer for the mariner to be able to follow. We have a recommended track. We have light buoys and beacons on the coral reefs, and it makes a much more easier to understand chart. Similarly, this is another part of that same old chart 662, which again has got this area's got lots of coral reefs. It's very dangerous, and to sail up here following this recommended track must have been quite complicated. Again, my compilation showing the different selection of soundings. We've tried to make it much more open and clearer for the mariner to be able to read. And again, the final product as it was printed. And this is the actual finished chart at a scale of 1 to 300,000. The new title, Fanjove Island to Dar es Salaam. Fanjove Island is down in the south and Dar es Salaam is up here. Now, 60 years ago, remember we are talking about the 1960s here, the process from compilation drawing to printed chart was long and tortuous. To start with, the compilation had been drawn in London. Charts were printed in Taunton in Somerset. So the first thing we had to do was to get the chart down to Taunton, and that was done via Paddington by rail. When the compilation arrived in Taunton, which in those days was known as the Hydrographic Supplies Establishment, the locals called it the Admiralty. When it got down to Taunton, either a copper plate engraver or a lithographic draftsman would take it up and carefully transfer all the information from the compilation onto something that could be printed, either a copper plate or a zinc plate. A proof would be pulled, and that proof would travel all the way back to London on the train to the office, where it would be extremely carefully examined for any errors. It would be updated, and it would be sent back down to Taunton. Now, depending on the amount of changes or corrections that had to be made, we may call for a second proof, which did the same thing all over again. Finally, a paper proof would be made, which would look exactly like the final printed chart. And by this time, I think everybody would be quite happy with the way it was looking. And again, it would be updated for any new information and sent all the way back to Taunton with the instruction that it could be dated, and a date will appear in the inscription below the border of the chart, and it would be printed. The new chart will be announced in the weekly notices to mariners that were available to all mariners, and the chart agents throughout the world would be able to order their stocks. Now, by the time the chart had been published, which was in September 1967, bearing in mind that I had actually finished drawing it in February 1966. It was 19 months anyway, from the time I finished drawing it to the time it hit the bridges of the ships using it. But by this time, I'd moved on to other things. Management in the office at that time believed in career development, which meant moving you around after 4 or 5 years. So just when you thought you knew what you were doing, you were moved to something new, usually with another chart branch. I was very fortunate. I spent some time in the immediate requirements branch in Whitehall. I spent a total of 15 years doing aerial survey work with helicopters, which was pretty good. And I also had the grand title for 6 years of curator of original documents, which meant really I was like a records manager, looking after the archive and all new incoming data. But between these rather specialist roles, I was going back to chart branches where I managed to climb the ladder of my career and get promoted as I went along. But in 2001, I found myself back where I started, in the branch responsible for charting the coast of Africa. The wheel had indeed turned full circle. But now I was not one of the compilation team, I was actually head of the branch. But what has this got to do with chart 3309, I hear you ask? Well, when I was quietly carving my career and for the most part thoroughly enjoying myself, chart 3309 was quietly doing what it had been designed to do. During those past 34 years, chart 3309 had been kept up to date by regular notices to mariners, just to ensure that vessels could navigate along that particular part of the African coast in safety, particularly through the very narrow channels that we were looking at earlier, which you can see on this particular slide. It is possible to sail out through the eastern side of Mafia Island, but anyone taking the inner channels would have to have complete confidence in the chart. And chart 3309 had been doing that successfully for 34 years. You could say that the chart, by ensuring safe passage, had saved hundreds of lives and saved hundreds of ships. That's what it was designed to do. It didn't have a fanfare of trumpets. It simply sat on the bridge of the ship or in the chart room, doing exactly what it was designed to do, ensure complete safety for the mariners who were actually navigating those rather treacherous waters between the coral reefs. The mariners had complete trust in the Admiralty chart. In fact, there's a 19th century saying that mariners put their trust in God and the Admiralty chart, and indeed that is exactly what people do when they rely so much on an Admiralty chart. Because you remember, when you're in a ship, you can't actually see what's below you. You may have your echo sounders and your radar, But unlike a map where you can see the terrain in front of you, on a ship, you've got a problem. But the writing was on the wall for the Fathom style chart. Metrication had arrived, and all the old Fathoms charts had to go, to be replaced by modern metric versions. This is not a simple case of converting fathoms to meters. You have to go right back to the original data. New chart schemes are prepared, different scales, and there was new symbology, new styles, a complete overhaul of the charting coverage. I'm saying thank you at that point because I took retirement in 2001. And on my last week in the office, a new metric chart scheme for the east coast of Africa was approved. One of my last acts as head of the branch was to sign off the withdrawal and cancellation of chart 3309. You know, it felt a bit like saying goodbye to an old friend, which I suppose it was. I brought chart 3309 into the world. It had served the seafaring community well, and here I was ordering its retirement. But chart 3309 had the last laugh. Due to some unavoidable delays in the particular metrication program, chart 3309 didn't disappear from the bridges of the vessels navigating between Fanjove Island and Dar es Salaam. Not quite as quickly as planned. It survived until 2003, when it was finally replaced by a new metric chart, 2929. But by then, I was long gone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. That's been a very interesting story, and it's a lovely twist at the end where it came full circle, and genuinely very interesting. So thank you again. Thank you very much, Ken. So to continue on, I'd like to take us over to Oana.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm grateful for the invitation for today's Teatime Talk. Although I'm a BCS member and a Map Lines editor for only 1 year and a half, the activities in the society have made this period to feel great richer than I could have imagined. And therefore, it's a great honor to present a map memoir to you at the start of the BCS 60th anniversary year. Today, I'll talk about a map series that discreetly influenced some of my maps and my decision to be a future-determined cartographer right in my very first months as a cartography student 5 years ago. It's not such a distant memory, probably because I'm still considering myself to be at the beginning of my chosen career, but it's a memory I'll always treasure, not only because of the product itself, but also for its bonds that I later describe. I knew I wanted to make maps with some years before I started university studies, with a lot of expectations that could not be fulfilled entirely. But along the roads, I also had some beautiful surprises that kept me going. And the most significant one is today's main actor of my story, a map collection I discovered. This is an atlas made by the Geography Institute from Romania between the 1974-1979, with a thematic composed of 13 sections, and is named the Atlas of the Socialist Republic of Romania. The maps I have from this atlas were printed at the Institute of Geology and Geophysics and Military Topographic Directorate from Romania. It's an atlas with folded maps, where a plotted and unfolded page would have dimensions slightly larger than the size of A1 paper, which would mean that it was difficult to carry and could only be read in an office. They were also accompanied by map descriptions written in 4 languages: Romanian, French, English, and Russian. The atlas contains 75 map sheets, summing approximately 500 maps, sketches, profiles, or diagrams, and over half of them are based on human geography and economic geography. And since the content of the atlas was created over several years, it was published in bundles for 5 years, and readers had to insert the new map sheets into the atlas every year. And the maps I have were never included in a complete atlas. They were probably lost at some point, but found long after they were printed. And I think the context in which it was made, it's important to understand its value. Professor David Turnock, a British geographer with a commitment to Romania, as he described himself, wrote about the difficulties and constraints regarding meetings with foreign researchers in the 1980s. And despite the difficulties and constraints, because of the Romanian geographer's effort and foreigner support, during the years of socialism, Romanian geography and cartography also had developments and achievements. And one of the important distinctions was the completion of this national atlas, which of course I discovered long after its publication, after almost 50 years. And political philosophy also impacted cartography, or the content of national atlases. And Professor Robert Kent wrote an article a long time ago on the influence of political orientation on national atlases, and found that the Eastern Bloc nations emphasized the subject of on industry in their atlases, which could also have meant that industrial development was a high priority for these nations. And what this atlas maps have in common are characteristics of the Romanian cartographic style of that time, like the use of red on most maps, even if in small quantities, the writing for hydrography inclined to the left, the use of dark color contours, symbolizing the elements in bright and saturated colors, but maintaining a balance through the faded and pastel colors in the background. And what I appreciated about this cartographic product was the approach to some topics rarely addressed at that time in Romania through maps. An important topic being the spatial distribution of toponyms, such as some ethnotoponyms, phytotoponyms, or appellatives, and even mapping the regions and the roads of shepherdism. What I liked most about this map is that sometimes the disappeared localities were also represented on the map, which can of course increase the reader's interest in historical geography. And another topic that I liked is the traditional port. This is also the map that influenced me the most along the way, which is a map definitely made with a lot of attention to every detail. It contains many drawings that represent particularities of traditional clothes depending on the territory. And when I discovered the maps, I was used to seeing contemporary maps that no longer incorporate illustrations and are made with much more simplicity. Of course, this is only due to my personal experience with maps until many years ago and not to the real situation. So I was surprised by the interest that was given before to the art. And I hope that at some point I could also merge my passion for drawing with that for cartography. And this is a distinct map too, due to the subject that is covered, because it was a period marked by the increase in number of means of transport in cities, and the map shows the transport capacity at peak hours in the big cities. And red is predominant again in these maps as well. And the context I created, the memory about this atlas, is more important to me than the product itself, because no matter how motivated the person is, success cannot be achieved without support. And in the first year at faculty, I started attending the technical laboratories of Professor Cesar Buterez, who sacrificed his free time to teach the students some of the most interesting subjects of cartography and GIS that could help us from the very beginning of our professional paths. He was also the one who gave me this collection of maps and gradually became my mentor in cartography. These maps and the teacher's way of organizing the laboratories developed over time my passion for thematic maps, my style, also my topic studies, and they even inspired me to create my own version of an atlas of urban geography, both printed and web. And just as the colors on these maps have been preserved throughout all these years, the dedication of geographers to create products that contribute to planning, evolution, and promotion should remain at least the same. It's important to learn from the maps we see, receive, create, and get inspired from their stories. They can be the foundation for new achievements in cartography. And in order to make better things today, it's important to know the works of the past, whether they are from a more distant or more recent period. And why not raise a question about tomorrow's cartographic products?
Oana, thank you very much for that talk. Very interesting. Look at the selection that you've got and the influence it's had. So finally, we've got our final speaker for tonight, and I will hand you over to Paul.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Seppi, as well, for inviting me along to this first map memoir in the series, which I'm sure are going to be really, really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing these talks progress. And thank you, Ken and Oana, too, for two great look backs on those maps that are inspirational to you. When I was asked by Chris and Seppi to do this, I really did struggle to decide on a map that kind of meant the most to me or had the most impact. And to be fair, I don't think I'm probably alone. I'm sure many of those that have been asked to come along and talk as part of these map memoirs probably feel the same. There are a lot of maps that have either meant something or do mean something to me. So I thought I'd just kind of touch on a few before I get into the main one. So if I pick the map that began my love affair with maps, then it would be this treasure map from the 80s classic movie, The Goonies, which, if you're not familiar with the movie, which I'm sure some of you are, it's about a group of kids who find a treasure map in their parents' attic and they go hunting for some treasure. So I think it's One-Eyed Willie's treasure to save their parents' home. And the reason I love that map is because as a young kid, I used to dream after watching that movie that I might find a treasure map and kind of go on that same adventure that they did. I never did find that treasure map, but my love affair with maps never faltered. And at the time, I never for 1 minute would have thought I'd then go on to kind of make maps for a living. I'm kind of really lucky in that sense. I then thought, well, do I pick my actual favourite map, which is really emotional to me? And that is Ordnance Survey's Explorer 116. I'm bound to be a little biased, of course, as I work for the Ordnance Survey, but I think Ordnance Survey Explorer maps are amazing. They've got so much detail. The cartography is amazing, and they are exceptional maps in my eyes. And I was lucky, you know, as I think I'd been at Ordnance Survey maybe 5 years, and I had the chance to actually work on these maps. And it was an absolute pleasure and privilege to have that opportunity. And I've just always, from that kind of moment, been a huge fan of them. But anyway, I'm a massive fan in particular of the Dorset and Lyme Regis sheet, the Lyme Regis and Bridport sheet, which covers a bit of Dorset and a bit of Devon, because I love the Jurassic Park and I love Lyme Regis. And this particular sheet has become a kind of great friend of me, my wife and my 2 boys over the years. And we've used many Explorer 116 sheets and replaced them many times. You know, we've graffitied all over them and they've become real treasures. We've never got rid of any of them. We've always kept them when we've updated them. So that's a map that's kind of really emotional to me and really means something. Or it was, do I go for the map that has had the most impact on me and my career? And in the end, that's the map that I went for. And it's a map I've always loved, and it's got a really great story behind it. And it began as a simple pen and pencil rough sketch, which you can see on screen at the moment. Hopefully, most of us recognise what this map is. It's Harry Beck's original sketch for his famous London Underground map design. Although it's fair to say, some of us would say it's not even a map. Some would argue, and we did at a previous BCS conference, that this is in fact a diagram, but that is probably a conversation for another day. And I will make an apology now, because I know our winter lecture was all about the London Underground map, so I hope you don't mind me talking a little bit about it now. All versions and imitations of the kind of modern London Underground map that we all know were derived from this first rough sketch, which I think is still available to see somewhere. I'm not sure if it's at the British Library or the V&A, but I think you can still see it somewhere. It measures about 24 by 19 centimeters and is a really simple, beautiful sketch, but you can see the kind of foundations there and the template for kind of metro system mapping that has kind of happened and become the world over. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And I love it for a number of reasons. And firstly, and maybe a little bit controversially, I love it because it was not made by a cartographer. Henry Charles Beck was an electrical engineer and a technical draftsman working for the London Underground Signals Office, where predominantly his job was to draw schematics for electrical systems. He was certainly he certainly became like an unlikely cartographic innovator, and he designed the tube map whilst unemployed after being fired from his job at the London Underground Signals Office, which is intriguing in itself, because what's great about that is the idea stemmed from Beck's kind of curious mind, rather than under any sort of direction from any employer. And that's what I find really fascinating about it. You know, he could see a problem with the tube maps of the time, and he wanted to change people's perception of how they navigate that tube system. So he applied the principles of drawing complex electrical circuitry to map making, and kind of concentrated on only showing those relationships and not the distances between various points on the map. And if you look at maps before Beck's, then it's pretty much underground lines laid out geographically, more often than not, on the top of a city's road network, like this one on screen at the moment. And these maps have been in use since the early 1900s, and I think were difficult to read and not really much to look at, and not very easy to navigate. Then in the early 1920s, kind of these non-geographic diagrams by a guy called George Dow appeared at most underground lines, kind of linear diagrams which ignored those geography between stations, but kind of equalized the distances between stations. and kind of kept those straight lines for the network. And you can kind of see, you can kind of look at this map on the screen now and kind of start to speculate that perhaps Dale's maps inspired Beck's work, and other people thought the same. It's easy to see why people might have thought that. But what I really love, another reason why I love it is Beck really understood the user. He was thinking about how a user would use that map, and it was his idea to kind of create a full schematic map of the underground network in colour. He believed passengers were only interested in how to get from one station to another and where to change trains. Geographic accuracy, he didn't think was important to users. And to be fair, it turns out he was right. Beck's simple and very obvious idea did take some time to be accepted by the management at London Underground. It was considered, way too radical because it didn't show distances relative from one station to the other. But thankfully, Beck persisted with his idea, and after a successful trial, the map was given its first full publication back in 1933. And it's fair to say the public loved it, and then it had its first large reprint after just 1 month. So you can see, it was so popular that it kind of had reprint after reprint. And then over the next 30 years, Beck consistently updated and revised his original London Underground map. So he was always a perfectionist. He was never satisfied with that first design. That's another reason why I loved it. He kept going back to it and going, right, I want to make it better. And he looked at other ways to represent that information. But sadly, from about 1960, his new revisions became unwelcome, due mainly to the appointment of a new publicity manager at London Underground. And Beck passed away in 1974, and he never really enjoyed any fame or status in his lifetime because of that map, which seems a real shame to me. He did also try his hand at redesigning the French metro system, but the French were not fans of his design, again, because they felt that distance between stations and the geography between the stations was really important. And the French were really passionate and protective of their own maps. When they saw this kind of radical new design by an Englishman, they weren't too happy, and that was one of the reasons why it never got taken on. It's also alleged that Beck was never actually paid for his map, which again, seems a real shame. He was obviously never commissioned to make it, and he worked on it mostly in his spare time. He was unemployed at the time. Although there are some reports that he might have been paid a kind of modest fee of about 5 or 10 guineas. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. And then, today the London Underground map looks very different. This isn't a one with the IKEA branding on it that I'm sure some of us are familiar with. Would Harry Beck approve of this map? Do I approve of how it looks today? It becomes more and more difficult when obviously there's more and more information to show. But that's another reason why I love it so much. There's a lot of other people that love it just as much as me as well. And even quite recently, there have been a lot of renowned cartographers, that some of them that I'm sure we're all familiar with, that have taken the design and tried to kind of implement their own ideas and tweaks without ever shifting too far from Beck's original design template. Because they love that design so much, but they just look at ways of just trying to make that information maybe a little bit more clearer, because there is so much more information to show now. And I'm sure there would be uproar if its design was ever radically changed today, and that's why it's never been changed. It's a design that works, and it's a design that's used the world over, that's loved by so many people. I mentioned, Beck never saw any recognition for his work, but in the early 1990s, London Regional Transport created the Beck Gallery at the London Transport Museum, where a lot of his work, thankfully, is displayed. And his home at 60 Courthouse Road, Finchley, was also marked with a plaque by the Finchley Society in 2003, which I think is a lovely touch. But also in March 2006, viewers of the BBC Two programme The Culture Show and visitors to London's Design Museum voted Beck's tube map as their second favourite British design of the 20th century. You know, it only lost out to Concorde, which again says huge amounts about what people's perception is of Beck's design. And it's great to see, a map, considered the second greatest design in British design in the 20th century. And that is it. That is the map that means the most to me. The idea behind it inspires me in my work every day. Understand the customer, understand the user. A well-designed map is one in which the intended message is clearly communicated to the map user in the best possible way, and Beck's map does that and some. Do I understand how my map will be used? These are the type of questions I ask myself, and I'm sure these are the type of questions that Beck asked himself when he was thinking about that design all those years ago. His design was radical at the time. He broke, what was the norm and really pushed boundaries. And that is my favourite map. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. That's been a genuinely another interesting one of how of a map that's had this real influence on you. So I would just like to move on to the Q&A session now. So I appreciate it's been a bit longer than usual, our talk, but we have a number of questions for our speakers. So the first question we have is for Ken. Ken, did you ever get out there? I can quite see you lording over Mafia Island.
Who's that from?
It's from Jerry.
Oh yeah. Hi Jerry. No, I never, in my time doing Africa, I never got out of the office. There was an invitation once to go to Mozambique, but actually I turned that one down. But when I was head of another branch, I did get out to Singapore. Again, it was talking about chart series, because every time you blink, Singapore seems to have got bigger, and new harbour installations were being built all the time. And there was another interesting visit I had, and Barbara will remember that, when we went to St. Petersburg. It seemed to involve an awful lot of vodka and a sauna, but I don't think I'll go into that one right now. Leave it for another day.
Okay. Next question we have is, how much of your original work was transferred into the metric version?
Yeah. Difficult one to answer, because in that particular case, the original survey work of the 1870s was still the main bulk of the material that was available. It's not a part of the world that is continually resurveyed, unlike home waters. So the basis of that metric chart was still the original material. However, the main channels had been resurveyed, and of course the local authorities are responsible for keeping the buoys and the beacons and the navigational lights up to date. So in many cases, well, no, not in many cases, in all cases, the metrication program went right back to the original data that was available, and all subsequent information that had come in since then. And the thought of still using a chart that's based on 19th century information may sound horrific, but if the seabed hasn't moved and regular check surveys are proving that nothing nasty has happened, it's fine to go ahead. So the answer is, in that particular case, the original material was still the majority of the chart.
That's good to know there. Okay, no, thanks for the answer, Ken. Okay, so now next question is for Oana. Where did you find the originals of the atlas?
Yes, I don't know where the professor got the maps. They were probably unused for a long time. But during a technical laboratory, he gave these maps to us, to the students. And I really felt like I discovered an old treasure. And I only have 16 map sheets from 75. But they inspired me a lot in creating thematic maps, also for this version of an atlas of urban geography that I made.
No, I have to say
So
it was
it's
very
very useful for me.
No, I have to say it was genuinely very interesting here. Well, the selection that you had, it was a very nice selection of maps showing a lot of different styles, and it was interesting to see. Just interesting to see what you had access to there. And funny enough, we have had from the Bodleian saying that that there are 2 copies of that atlas in their collection. Right.
Yes, I think there are some more copies in Romania too.
No, it's good to see. It's good to see these atlases are around, and people people may be able to access them if they know the right place to go. Okay, so next one is a thank you from to all those involved. Fantastic presentations and great stories on sharing your personal memories. And from Seppi, a brilliant start to the Map Memoir series, and a big thank you to all the speakers. And we have a question for Paul. Paul, what would you change on the tube map?
Yeah, good question. I'd remove the IKEA from it for a start. That's the first thing I'd do. No, seriously, I think for me, accessibility now is really important. It's something I talk about a lot at Ordnance Survey and the presentations I give. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure if the current tube map is CVD, colour vision deficiency friendly for those who are colourblind. So I think one change that I'd like to see implemented or try to implement would be to give it a colour scheme that was colourblind friendly, essentially. That would be one big change.
An interesting challenge for the.
It would be. It would mean changing a lot of signage and.
Yes, I would be very that would be very popular with a lot of people on the underground. We can see great use in it, but the challenges of changing over a century of color schemes. Okay, and from Barbara Bond, it's thanks for the St. Petersburg memory, Ken.
My pleasure.
Yes, and yes, okay, and so of all three of those brilliant maps, Paul, got to love the Goonies. Didn't twig before the one-eyed Willie, of course, a cartography. Yep. Okay. Again, interesting insights to everyone, and this I believe will be to Ken. So does that make all pirates cartographers? I like to think so. And that's from Paul.
Funny enough, someone suggested I do a talk on pirates. We should have enough material somewhere.
Yes, and here's another question that will be to Paul. Great talk. It's great talks to from all three of you. Paul, Harry Beck's map is such a design icon. How have you used to influence design in your own work?
Yeah, another good question. So a few years back, we created our own carto design principles, and a lot of those principles were created whilst thinking of other maps that had been made. And Harry Beck's was always one that came to mind when we were talking about user requirements, which is one of our principles that we adhere to at Ordnance Survey. And that's what I now always do. I'm always thinking about the user. So whenever I'm asked to make maps, or whether it's, you know, looking at how data can be represented geographically in different ways, I'm always trying to understand how the user will work either with that data or with the geography behind that data. And so that's how I think Harry Beck's map has probably had most impact on the work I do. It's about understanding the user requirements, because I think that's what Beck did really well. Essentially, he took something that had existed for, you know, a few decades and kind of thought, actually, I don't think that's how people would get most use out of trying to navigate what was quite a complicated network system. You know, seeing things geographically is not what's important to users of the map. It's actually how to get from station to station, and where to change stations, where are those stations. You know, so he really understood what the user wanted from the map. And, you know, you could see that, you know, when his map was released, okay, London Underground didn't like it, but that's because I think it was too radical. It wasn't like he was just tweaking something. He was being really radical and pushing against the norm. But when it was actually given the go-ahead, because he kept persisting with it, the public absolutely loved it, you know, because it worked. You know, that's what you needed to do. They needed to get that out and just test it. Because anybody can just say, oh no, that's not. We always put our maps in front of other people just to get people to test it as well, just to make sure that we are meeting the user's requirements, essentially.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul, for the answer. So I just want to bring this to a close, but I want to say thank you very much again to all of our speakers, and thank you very much for sharing these experiences and maps, and setting a nice standard for the beginning of for the rest of the Map Memoirs for the rest of the year. So I want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers for their talks, and I hope that everyone will join us next time for our next group of Map Memoirs. But for today, thank you and goodbye.